Every Monday, Chris Hedges, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author, former New York Times war correspondent, writes an article on his publication called truthdig.com. Today's article is entitled Radical Evil. And there's a portion of the article that I want to read, and then I want to break it down. But I have to say that I don't agree with the entire article. It's about a 15-minute read, and he does talk about Extinction Rebellion in the article. He supports Extinction Rebellion, and here at Book of Hours, we do not. We believe that Extinction Rebellion, and there's proof that Extinction Rebellion is funded by and lifted up by the very corporations that they claim to be wanting to dismantle or fight against. So there's a conflict there. There's a conflict of interest, there's a conflict of an agenda, and it makes for a very confusing narrative when you do your research. So I've chosen not to support Extinction Rebellion because I don't believe that they are legitimate. They talk about, how to get arrested by the police and things like that. And I just find that that's dangerous to, especially to young people who are easily influenced. Chris Hedges supports them. He's had them on his weekly talk show. It's not a talk show. It's a news segment. He's had him on his weekly show at least twice. So, I don't agree completely. But like I said, this article that he wrote, I agree with about 90% of it. And I want to talk to you about this one particular paragraph, which I'm going to read. These architects of radical evil extract the coal, oil, and gas, poisoning our air, soil, and water, while demanding huge taxpayer subsidies and blocking the urgent transition to renewable energy. I'm going to stop there. Blocking the urgent transition to renewable energy. That's false. The huge taxpayer subsidies that he talks about will be used to create renewable energy. It's actually just the opposite of what he says. What's happening is, you've got companies that are run by Bill McKibben and Al Gore and Bill Gates and various other NGOs out there that are building $100 trillion worth of programs that will do everything from clean up the ocean to create renewable energies. So to transition into this new type of energy away from coal and oil. So in order to pay for these programs, we have to tax the citizens in the same way that we had to tax the citizens to pay for the banking industry's programs back in 2007 and 2008. So those programs will be taxed. And when they fail, the people who are behind the programs will not lose any money, but you will. And so that's the part that's wrong about this particular paragraph, is that it specifically says, while demanding huge taxpayer subsidies and blocking the urgent transition to renewable energy. That's wrong. You don't have a $100 trillion budget to combat climate change, but at the same time say, why are you blocking the transition to renewable energy? I mean, this is nonsensical. So anyway, I'm going to move on with the rest of the paragraph. They are the massive corporations that own factory farms, egg hatcheries, and dairy farms, where tens of billions of animals endure horrendous abuse before being needlessly slaughtered, part of an animal agriculture industry that is one of the leading multifactorial causes of climate catastrophe. Okay, I'm a vegetarian, but I do eat eggs, and I do eat cheese. I don't drink milk. I drink almond milk or I drink oat milk, but I don't eat meat. So there's a couple of things going on here from my perspective, from a personal perspective. So you have to keep that in mind, and keep that in mind with everything that you listen to and everything that you that you read and all the podcasters out there, everybody is coming from their own perspective. And there are people out there that, they put it out front. Look, I'm trying to be as unbiased and bipartisan in my delivery as possible. But, it's hard. Like even if you're coming from a place of privilege, like there's an heiress who's a communist who I retweet, but she's a fucking heiress. She's one of the most wealthy people in the country. But she's also like an ML, Marxist Leninist. So some of the things that she says I agree with, but I also have to remember that she is saying things from her perspective of being born into a meritocracy and having privilege that I never had. All right, so this next sentence there, the massive corporations that own the factory farms, egg hatcheries, and dairy farms where tens of billions of animals endure horrendous abuse before being needlessly slaughtered, part of an animal agriculture industry that is one of the leading multifactorial causes of climate catastrophe. So my personal belief is that I believe that animal agriculture is a big part of global warming or climate issues. I don't even like using the word climate change because I know that climate change means weather. So people were complaining about it being warm in October. It's called an Indian summer. I didn't grow up in the Midwest. I grew up in California, but even I know what an Indian summer is. Weather changes, climate changes. There's also various factors because of climate change, whether it's the geoengineering that is widely talked about and widely, funded. The New York Times even lifts it up and talks about how great it is, about how we're cooling the planet through these programs that are funded out of Carnegie Mellon University and Harvard University and the Bill Gates Foundation. So it's not a conspiracy. These are real programs that are in place. So climate changes because of that. Climate also changes because it's what it does, but climate also may change, or there may be global warming or too much methane in the atmosphere because of animal agriculture and various other types of agriculture, or various other types of practices, like oil refineries and fracking and all that stuff. So I do, to a certain extent, believe that animal agriculture is a big part of global warming or climate change. But I think what's more important about the animal agricultural practices and business practices doesn't have anything to do with climate change. And this, I wish Chris Hedges would talk about this because he's a minister and he should be talking about things like this. I'm talking about the way that animals are treated before we eat them. This is going to sound really like I'm coming right out of zombie land, but I really do believe that the way we treat the animals and the way we eat them is like what's in store for our future, especially if we still have these crazily funded programs by Carnegie Mellon and Bill Gates, where they're going to block out the sun and they're going to cool the planet. If you don't have a sun, then you don't have agriculture. The animals will die off. You won't have any animals to eat. So, like in that terrible book, The Road, which I read, and then I saw the movie, you will have people eating people. I know that sounds really awful, but it sounds crazy, but I really feel that we have a moral lesson that we can learn from the animal agricultural industry with the way that they are so horrible to the animals. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting the way the animals are treated. And I think that there's something there. There's something inside of us as human beings where we have this weird sense of entitlement and these godlike complexes where we will take another sentient being that has emotion and has a heartbeat and has feelings, and we will torture it for life, and then we'll eat it. I mean, there's something wrong with us when we do that. And I think we really need to take a good hard look at that practice and within ourselves And maybe some empathy will come up, because right now there's too much sociopathy and too much psychopathy that's running the show. It's running all of our corporations and it's running our government bodies. So let me continue with the paragraph. They are the generals and arms manufacturers. They are the bankers, hedge fund managers, and global speculators who looted $7 trillion from the U.S. Treasury after the pyramid schemes and fraud they carried out imploded the global economy in 2007 and 2008. So the very same practices that were put into place for the banking industry, all the protections they had, it'll be the same kind of protections that these renewable energy companies will have at our expense. They are the goons in state security who make us the most spied upon, watched, monitored, and photographed population in human history. When your government watches you 24 hours a day, you cannot use the word liberty. This is the relationship between a master and a slave. Yes, so I think that what happens in a collapsed society, and so that's a term that Dr. Naomi Wolf has used in the past, and I'm sure she continues to use it. But part of a closed society, actually she uses the term closed democracy. And I think I say collapsed society. So in a closed democracy and in a collapsed society, you have this lack of understanding about how you behave when you are being watched. When you know that you are being watched 24/7 through your iPhones and your computers and your social media presence and your videos and your photos and your Instagrams and everything and your TikToks, when you know that you are being watched, your behavior changes and it becomes inauthentic. So which means that you've lost your autonomy. When autonomy is lost, that's when you have a real breakdown. You have a real breakdown in society that I'm not sure it's repairable. I'm not sure that you can recover from that. That's something for people who are far more advanced intellectually and psychologically than I am. Can a society recover from collapsed autonomy? And so, the article it's like a 15-minute read, and it's really good, except for the part where he supports Extinction Rebellion. I don't support them at all. They're far too compromised, and they go beyond compromised. They are willingly and knowingly putting people in some serious hardship. We're talking like people getting arrested, and now they have records of people who are out there. And when you have a record, it's like it's going to be hard for them to get a job in the future. And these are young people. So, and also they're backed by the billionaires. They're backed by the very people that they claim to be rallying against. What do we do to combat climate change? Because we're very green. Well, we didn't have children over here at Book of Hours. We were told that the planet was too populated, so we didn't have children. We were also the most scapegoated generation in human history, being Generation X. Everything seems to be our fault. We also don't have a car. My husband rides his bike everywhere, or we take public transportation. We also are turning a vacant lot into this community that we live in, which is extremely impoverished. So lots of people just vacate their properties or vacate their land or their homes or their apartments without paying rent, without paying taxes, because they are destitute. We live in real destitution. I mean, we don't even have sidewalks, right? So there's a vacant lot across the street, which we are slowly but surely trying to turn into a community garden so we can teach, especially the children in this area, not how to get arrested and fight climate change, but how to feed yourself from the earth. That bag of potato chips that you reach for, or that your mom buys with her food stamps, that may not serve you well in the long run. So perhaps teaching them how to grow food like tomatoes and beans and things like that out of container gardens or raised beds is more effective. So that's what we do. And we also educate people locally. I was actually asked by a local recently, what does the word dystopia mean? And I was like, well, look around. See all the blight in the neighborhood, see the sidewalks that are all cracked up that haven't been fixed in 50 years, see the overgrown weeds coming out of people's houses they've been abandoned, decades ago. That's called dystopia. You live in it. But see, when you live in it for so long and you're part of it, you don't realize you're living in it. I do, because I came from a very privileged city, San Francisco, which has hardly any blight and lots of options available for the consumer. So I believe that we're looking at, so like I said, like what Naomi Wolf said, it's a closed democracy. So this is to do with suspension of rules, which is something that we talked about in our video called S47. If you want to go back and look at it, you can. But suspension of rules is now the normal practice for passing legislation in the state now. And suspension of rules basically is fascism. This is where they have complete carte blanche to pass whatever rules they want without telling you what it is. And so a lot of the funding that's supposed to come back into communities like mine that I currently live in, which is very dystopic, the funding that we might get from, say, HUD is not going to go to the community to fix the streets. Maybe it'll fix one street, but most of it's going to go to the corporations. So I'm trying to teach the people that, that's probably what's going to happen here. And that's where the frustration lies, is that the money is being gobbled up by corporations. And they just passed this in Congress. So under suspension of rules. So this means that, it's just yet another level into fascism, So, and I also believe that when you are in a closed society or a closed democracy or a collapsed society is when you're having sort of a real disconnect with critical thought. You don't understand why you feel the way you do, and you feel the way you do because the state is constantly monitoring you and watching you, which means that you have to change your behavior. And that's not freedom at all. That's complete stealing of your autonomy. And so that's not freedom. So people are going around behaving the way that they behave, not realizing that it's not an organic process. Their life is no longer this organic process. It is something that is contrived, and so when that happens, you can't really put your finger on it. It's not a specific thing that you can really blame. You're like, I don't understand why I feel the way I feel. And so when people don't understand why they're having feelings, they start to lash and they start to take it out on others. I wrote something well over a year ago, just a few days after I left San Francisco, called Why I Left San Francisco, a long read, a really good piece that I wrote. It made a local person here who's a little bit brain damaged, but he has his own business because he was handed the business by his family. It made him so uncomfortable that he went around and said, that I was like crazy communist from California. You know what I mean? It made him so comfortable because there was so much to it that probably could explain why he was feeling the way he was feeling about life in general. Like, why is it that I work so hard and I pull myself up by my bootstraps and yet I'm still poor? Where's that American dream? He's probably thinking I'm as old as I am, and it's not really there. Like, I don't get it. And I wrote some things that would explain that, that it's the transfer of wealth up to, and of course, Trump passed, you know, the tax break, which gave the largest transfer of wealth to a very few people in history, so that's not stabilizing the economy. That's actually making it worse. So these people who go around saying that Trump is stabilizing the economy and that they're going to vote for him because of that, they're living in this weird delusion. And you can't, sometimes when they're too old, you can't really break through. Like, you can't really tell them the truth, right? And so that's another problem too. It's that people are actually espousing lies, and maybe on some fundamental level they know they're lying, but they're just carrying on as if it's the truth, and they're arrogantly carrying on about it, and it's so weird. Like, I try to I try to say, there are people who do what they do for a reason. It's not what you do in the world that matters. It's how you react to what is being done to you that matters. So, these things are being done to us. And I think that when you're in that master-slave relationship with the state, and you don't talk about it, and you don't diagnose it, and you don't really look at it, then you're going to be confused a lot of the time, and you're always going to be feeling bad a lot of the time and not really understanding why. So you have to read, you have to dig a little deeper, you have to listen to people that are smarter than you, even if there are some things that you may not agree with them on. Like, for instance, I don't agree with Chris Hedges' support of Extinction Rebellion, but there are certain things in this 15-minute article that I read that I do agree with. So you have to be able to really just try to live as complete a life as possible, and understand that, like, it's okay to feel confused. It's okay to feel the way you do, because this is what it feels like when you live in a collapsed society.